All right, good morning, class. We're talking about functions today. The essential question is, how does the domain affect the range in a function? And so we're going to talk about both of those words and how they affect each other. Start with a function. A function, it's a relation in which every member of the domain, the input value, everything that goes into the function, is paired up with exactly one member of the range value, the output value. So there's something that goes into the function, right? And then there is some kind of output. So there's an input, and for each input there's a specific output. Okay, and we're going to take a look at some examples of that. By the way, the keyword for this week is Apple. Okay, keyword is Apple. Don't tell anybody. All right, at the Apple Store, downloads D for music are 99 cents each. Okay, if the total cost C can be expressed as the following. This is a function. Okay, so it's 99 cents times the letter D, which represents the number of downloads. So there's some kind of input for downloads and there's some kind of output for the cost. So in a function there's two types of variables, okay? And not just different letters, but there's two different types. And here are the two different types. There are variables called the independent variables, and then there's the dependent variables. Okay, so the independent variables, it can be changed. The dependent variables, it's affected by the independent variable. So this depends on what you choose over here. So the independent variables, you have control over it, versus the dependent variable, you don't have control of it. And what do I mean by that? If I go back to my example here, if you're downloading music on the Apple Store, you get to choose how many downloads you're going to decide to have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 100, whatever. This is going to be considered your independent variable. The dependent variable is the cost. The cost depends on how many you download. This cost you can't really change. That's up to the company, right, to see how much they're charging. But the number of downloads you do have control of. So independent, and this is dependent. So I just wrote that out in words for you. So which is independent, which is dependent from the previous example? Well, D for downloads, the number of downloads, you control that. So that's independent, right? What you have control of is independent. What you don't have control is the cost. And that you can't really determine. So that one's the dependent, cost is dependent, and the number of downloads is independent. So now you try. For each situation below, determine which unknown variable is the independent and which one is the dependent variables. All right, so let's take a look. I've got this situation. We're going to determine what goes where. Here's the equation. D equals 4.5 times H, where the number of miles D, that's what D stands for, and Sam ran is 4 hours. So Sam ran a certain amount of miles in a number of hours. So which one of those two variables do you have control of? Number of miles or how long they run? Okay, so in this case, the independent variable is the number of hours. Okay, number of hours, you can determine how far you're going to run. How long are you going to run for? An hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? So however long you run depends, the number of miles depends on how long you run, right? You run for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. The number of miles starts to increase, okay? And so the number of hours is your independent variable. The number of miles is your dependent variable. Let's try another one. So S equals G plus 3, where the final score of a game, S, this is the final score, after the number of goals, G. So what determines what? Well, in this case, the number of goals, that's the independent, right? That's what you have control of. If you're playing a game, you have control of the number of goals. You know, you try really hard to make some goals. That's the independent variable. Now the score, though, the final score, it all depends on the number of goals, right? So this is your dependent variable, and this would be your independent. All right, so now we've talked about independent and dependent variables. We're going to talk a little bit more about functions. Now, if you recall, just write this out. This is an example of a function. Okay, this is read as the function of x. This is how you actually read that. And this x over here is the actual input. We'll call that the domain. That's what you have control of. You have control of what goes in there. You times it by 5. That would be your output. So this over here, it's called the output, right? Whatever we plug in for x, times it by 5, there's some kind of output. It's also known as your range. Okay, we talked a little bit about that in class already, so just kind of bringing that back. Let's take a look at an example. It says, look, find the function of negative 3 if the function of x is equal to 2x plus 1. Looks complicated, but it really is not. And here's what we do. We say, look, okay, this is the function. This is kind of what they're telling me to do. What am I going to replace with x? Well, whatever they tell me to replace it with. They tell me to replace it with a negative 3, and so that's what I do. I do nothing over here. This is not negative 3f. I don't multiply anything. This is just saying, hey, look, when you plug in negative 3 to x, what will be your result? So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. You add 1 to it, and you get your answer. So therefore, the function of negative 3, right, when you plug that into this f of x, you get a negative 5 as an answer. Okay, so there's an input, and this is the output. When I type in negative 3 into here, I get negative 5 as an output. Let's take a look at another example. Okay, watch this all the way through. Function of 2 if the f of the function of x is equal to x minus 4. So what happens when I plug in 2 in for x? Well, 2 minus 4 gives me negative 2. So my input is 2, my output is negative 2. My domain is 2, my range is negative 2 in this case. Let's try one last one here. The function of 11 if f of x is half of x plus 5. All right, so what happens when I type in 11? Well, half of 11 is 5.5. Add another 5 to it, I get 10.5. So the function of 11, when I type in 11 into my function, I get 10.5 as my resulting answer. Last page of my notes here talks about function tables. Okay, so it's a way to organize your information is to create a table. So I'll show you right here. Your independent variables are known as the domain. We talked about that. And the dependent variables are known as your range. So get that down in your notes, and let's take a look at this last example. Choose your 4 values for x to make the function table for f of x is equal to x plus 3. So here we go. I've got my domain. These are the ones that I get to choose. I get to choose what goes into the rule, and then the range is whatever the answer is. So let's take a look. I chose negative 2 to start with. So I type in negative 2 right here. So negative 2 plus 3, that gives me 1 as an answer. Next, I tried negative 1. Negative 1 plus 3 is equal to 2. Let's try 2 more here. I type in 0. 0 plus 3 gives me 3. And the last one, 1. 1 plus 3 gives me 4. So here are all the ones I got to choose. I plugged it into the function, and this is what came out. And so the last part says to state the domain and range. Well, it's easy as saying, look, all my domain values are right here. Those are all the ones I got to choose, negative 2 all the way through 1. And my range values are all the output. That's the result. After I type those in, what were the resulting answers? That would be 1 through 4. All right, that should take care of our notes for today. Make sure you get all these in. Remember your keyword and be ready with questions tomorrow.